afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome once again to On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about Moscow's decision to cut off gas supplies to both Poland and Bulgaria, former Soviet satellite states, now in the European Union, of course. The Kremlin's move has sent wholesale gas prices soaring. Does that mean even higher utility bills for hard-pressed households and firms here in Britain? Plus, we're discussing the price of gold and, wait for it, vegan dog food. Barking mad or a tail-waggingly good business opportunity? All that and more on The Money after the GB News with Rosie Wright.
A very good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date here on GB News. Now, Labour has accused the Prime Minister of having his head in the sand over the cost of living crisis. In the final Prime Minister's questions before the local government elections, Sir Keir Starmer said Boris Johnson is failing to manage the economy. As the hike in national insurance takes effect, Sir Keir said millions of people will look at their payslip this week and see Boris Johnson's fingerprints all over it.
He pretends the economy is booming, but where there are problems, they're global. But in the real world, our growth is set to be slower than every G20 country except one, Russia. And our inflation is going to be double the rest of the G7. Does he think that denying the facts, staring him in the face, makes things better or worse?
The Prime Minister responded by defending his record.
We will return to being the fastest by 2024 and the fastest in 2025, Mr. Speaker. That's what the IMS forecasts say. He asks about, read it. He asks about working people, Mr. Speaker. This is the government, this is the party that supports working people. Unlike them, with the biggest increase, yes, I'll tell you what's going up. The living wage is going up, Mr. Speaker, by record amounts. Employment is going up, Mr. Speaker, by record amounts.
Food bank managers are warning of an accelerating crisis as households struggle with the cost of living. The Trussell Trust says its network sent out more than 2 million parcels to families in the past year. They say parents are skipping meals and staying without heating so they can afford things like the internet for their children's homework. The Prime Minister has apologised to those who lost loved ones in care homes at the start of the pandemic, admitting that the government didn't know that COVID could be transmitted asymptomatically. It follows a High Court ruling today that government policies to discharge patients from hospital to care homes were unlawful. The case was brought forward by 2 women whose fathers died from COVID-19 in 2020. Judges said the regulations failed to take into account the risk to elderly and vulnerable residents from non-asymptomatic transmission. The Prime Minister says the 287 MPs sanctioned by Russia should regard it as a badge of honour. The retaliatory move comes ahead of a major speech by the Foreign Secretary, who will urge tonight allies to send tanks and warplanes to Ukraine. Liz Truss will warn that the West must prepare for the long haul to ensure Russia is defeated. She'll also call for tougher economic sanctions to further isolate Russia, including cutting off oil and gas imports once and for all. Well, Greenpeace figures show the UK has imported around £220 million worth of Russian oil since President Putin started the invasion of Ukraine. Moscow is now being accused of blackmail after Gazprom halted gas supplies to Poland and threatened to do the same to Bulgaria. Both countries have refused to pay in rubles. 5 Metropolitan Police officers will face a disciplinary panel over the stop and search of 2 black Olympic athletes.
Wait, he didn't do anything! No.
Bianca Williams and Ricardo dos Santos were stopped in West London while driving with their baby son in the car. Well, both were handcuffed, searched, and it's led to accusations of racial profiling. Releasing a statement, Bianca Williams said a clear focus on the racism problem within the Met is long overdue. The Transport Secretary says P&O Ferries' boss's refusal to resign is unsustainable and that he has to go. His comments were made as P&O resumes freight services between Dover and Calais after sacking nearly 800 workers last month. Grant Shapps told MPs the company will have to pay its new staff minimum wage when new legislation is introduced.
It's completely unsustainable to have the head of the P&O, the boss, Peter Hebblethwaite, who came to a committee room like this and openly and deliberately explained how he sought to avoid the law, to break the law. He actually said that was his intention and that he would do it again to remain in the post of leading that company. He will have to go.
This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head back to Liam for On the Money.
And coming up on the money today, Moscow's cutting gas supplies to both Poland and Bulgaria. Former Soviet satellite states, now in the European Union, of course. That sent gas prices soaring this morning, pointing to even higher household and business utility bills in the future. But how should the West respond? Plus, as the cost of living crisis continues, how are we changing the way we shop? Our East Midlands reporter speaks to local retailers. And as inflation soars, we're returning to On the Money's interest in gold, traditionally bought to preserve wealth as cash loses its value. We'll be hearing from the founder of a phone app allowing you to buy and sell gold. Plus, each day On the Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview. Today we're talking to the founder of a totally vegan dog food brand. Can canines really be healthy based on plant-based diets? Do dogs even like vegan food? We hear from the entrepreneur, from a vet, and even from a dog. That's later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money? How do they impact you? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. And stay with us, because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're On the Money. Liz Truss is calling for an increase in defence spending, arguing the West has overseen a generation of underinvestment, which led to the invasion of Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary wants the traditional NATO target, the defence spending equals 2% of GDP, to be a minimum. 2% of UK GDP, that's currently around £43 billion, or roughly 60% of what the UK government currently spends on education. In a major foreign policy intervention, Truss will this evening give UK backing for Sweden and Finland, which shares a common border with Russia, of course, to join NATO. The free world needs to reboot, recast and remodel its approach to deterring aggressors, she will argue, while vowing, in her words, to double down on UK military support for Ukraine. While the UK and NATO aren't engaged in military conflict directly with Russia, of course, this is a full-on East-West economic war. Western sanctions are in place trying to prevent goods and financial flows from moving in and out of Russia. That's stoking up fuel and food prices everywhere, of course, given that Russia is ordinarily a major supplier. That's seriously aggravating the cost of living crisis here in the West. Russia supplies around 40% of Western Europe's natural gas, but now the Kremlin is upping the ante, cutting off gas supplies to both Poland and Bulgaria. Moscow satellite states back in the days of the Soviet Union, both Poland and Bulgaria, and now in the EU. So Russia's move marks a major escalation of its energy conflict with the West. Moscow claims it's cutting supplies from Poland and Bulgaria, which get 45% and 75% of their gas from Russia, respectively, because both are refusing to pay for that gas in rubles. The Kremlin wants ruble payment to shore up its currency and presumably to get around Western sanctions, now excluding Russia from the US-dominated SWIFT banking network, which limits Moscow's ability to make payments abroad in other currencies. At the start of this month, UK household utility bills rose an average of 54% on average, as energy regulator raised the price cap to reflect soaring wholesale gas prices. There are more increases in the pipeline, and this row with Russia won't help. On European markets this morning, the gas price spiked by 20% on news of the Kremlin's move. Poland accuses Russia of gas imperialism. Bulgaria says it's blackmail. And Foreign Secretary Liz Truss will now no doubt be updating tonight's speech to condemn what Moscow has done. But be in no doubt, this refusal to pump gas to certain EU nations marks a major escalation as Moscow pushes back against Western sanctions, sanctions which the West may now in turn choose to tighten even more. And that's our on-the-money question today. Just how should the West respond to Russia's energy blockade? Grown-up discussions with people who know their stuff on this show, and it doesn't really get more serious than this. Joining me is a research professor at the London School of Economics and former advisor for the Ministry of Defence. We also have Ben Aris, who's the editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews. We also have in the studio co-founder of Regionally, Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Gwyddian Prince, let's go to you first. What do you make of Russia's move? Are you surprised that they're now physically cutting off gas supplies to Western European countries, albeit countries only recently who have joined the EU? It is a major escalation, isn't it?
I'm not at all surprised, Liam. The Russians have just experienced a catastrophic military defeat at the hands of the Ukrainian armed forces during the first 2 months of this war. Therefore, they are moving towards things which they believe we will pay attention to. They have waved nuclear weapons at us, and now they're making these moves. But in both of these areas, we have got what in the security business is called escalation dominance. I think that one of the most striking things of the last week or so has been the really impressive way in which the free world, which is a wider consortium than just NATO, has come together to be able to finesse these nuclear threats, at the same time as making it clear that the penny has now dropped after 6 weeks, that our interests lie in ensuring that the Ukrainians have not only the means to defend themselves, but also the means to prosecute this war to a victory on their terms.
Ben Aris, you've lived and worked as a correspondent in Russia for many, many years. Your publication, BNE IntelliNews, covers Russia, the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, Central Europe. You're steeped in the politics and economics of energy markets and pipelines. Are you surprised that Russia's upped the ante in this way?
No, not really. This whole thing turns on.
I think we've lost Ben Aris there. He will come back to us. I do apologise. He's just got a Wi-Fi issue. Justin, let's just get, while we're trying to get Ben back up on the line, let's get your take on this. Up until now, even during the Soviet period, Russia, the Soviet Union, didn't block. It might have rows about the price and the conditions and even the currencies. It didn't actually physically block. No, this is pretty much the first time I can remember they have physically blocked, and they've picked off, with all respect, two of the weaker EU countries, saying to the likes of Germany, France and even the UK, not in the EU, still powerful, are you going to let us do this to your small friends?
I mean, this is a form of not blackmail, it's gasmail. They can make life incredibly difficult for them. The only way you could really switch off or transfer, you've got to provide a viable alternative. There are alternatives, but it's not a matter of just a quick switch. You've got to make sure LNG, if it's coming from Qatar...
That's liquid natural gas that you put on ships.
Absolutely.
That can come from America, it can come from Qatar, as you say.
Absolutely, and we're seeing ships having to... They change ownership, not the ships, but the contents several times whilst they're actually on their way there.
That's right.
We've got all the, as you say, the fracking stuff coming out of the States. That can be got at quite easily. Domestically here, it's more difficult for us. There are some old gas fields. We can try that. We even go back to more controversial fracking in this country. But what you have to do with someone like Putin here, you've got to face them down. And I'm afraid none of this comes cheaply, and I'm afraid there's going to be pain back in Britain. We're already seeing part of it with inflation. If we want to see this through, it's going to cost us more.
Let's go back to Gwydion Prince. Gwydion, you've worked as an advisor to the MOD, to NATO. You know a lot about how government operates at the highest level. How do you think we will respond to this? How do you think we should respond to this? There may be some people who are struggling to pay their gas bills, some businesses who are seeing the cost of living crisis crush their enterprise, say, look, let's just try and de-escalate this. What would you say to them?
And how we will respond, Liam, are two different questions. How we should respond is that we now need, and what I hope to hear from Ms. Truss this evening is that we will get this, we need an integrated security policy, and that has three component parts. It has got a traditional security dimension, and that you referred to in your opening. She's calling, like others, and I and many others have called for a long time, for a proper restoration of the level of expenditure, public expenditure on defence. But we also need a thermodynamically competent and economically competent energy policy, and we also need a food security policy, and all three of those are interlinked.
Absolutely right, in the sense that food security, energy security, it used to be the preserve of nerds like you and me, Gwydion, banging on about spreadsheets and projections, but now that's absolutely at the top of domestic politics.
Can I give you just a practical example as to where this linkage comes? On the 24th of February, playtime ended. We've now gone back to the real world. And so things which we thought were nice to have, virtue signalling, saying nice things about how we're going to save the planet and so on, particularly the policy, the misguided policy of net zero, simply has to be parked. And one of the reasons, Justin's already referred to it, is that we've got to have thermodynamically competent fuels, which renewables are not. They're very low-grade fuels. They're very expensive, contrary to all of the propaganda, because they have such high management charges, because you've got to deal with the fact that they are intermittent and they're uncontrollable. But the link that needs to be made now is between energy and food because of Ukraine. Now, let me explain. Ukraine, since the time of Catherine the Great, has been the grain basket of Central Europe, and nowadays much wider. Ukraine's exports before this year were about 35 million tons of corn and 5 to 6 million tons of vegetable oil. Now, that's going to be lost. And there is a very simple but hard rowing back that our government could take tomorrow, which would cover that over and would also help the cost of living. And that is the abandonment of the completely pointless policy of adding biomaterial to road fuels. Globally, biofuels, 170 million tons of corn is diverted from food production into cutting petrol with bioethanol, and 50 million tons makes biodiesel instead of vegetable oil. So you can see from those figures that if you simply abandoned that policy, you would not only cover over the shortfall this year from Ukraine, but you would also manage the opportunity cost of land which is currently being lost to food production for this really quite pointless activity, which has a negative return on energy return for energy invested.
OK, Gwydion Prince, hold that thought. Let's just briefly bring in Ben Aris. Ben, I'm sorry about your comms issues before. You're joining us from Berlin. Let's just get an initial response for you. We'll carry on this discussion after the break. What do you make of Russia's move to physically cut off gas to Poland and Bulgaria?
Well, like you said in your intro, that we're in a full economic war, and this is the first battle in the gas wars that are going to dominate the story this year. And as winter approaches in October, that is going to get more fraught. And this is part of a scheme that the Kremlin is running, where they're asking both Poland, well, the whole of Europe, to pay for their gas in rubles. And it's designed to create an artificial demand for the ruble, which collapsed as soon as the war started. And Poland and Bulgaria have both refused to pay in rubles. And so Gazprom's going to cut them off. And I think we're going to see progressively this kind of argument expand as we go forward, because the Kremlin is attempting to blow a hole in the whole financial sanctions by forcing its customers, and customers like Germany, who can't cut Russian gas off, to make them pay in rubles in order to prop up the ruble at home, which it has done fairly successfully, and to blow a hole in the sanctions, which makes it impossible to stop, or at least keeps Russia in the banking system and keeps the ruble in circulation so that the sanctions don't work.
Let's carry on this after the break. A really fascinating and pivotal discussion. If you follow the economics, you know where politics is going to be in a few weeks' time. That's what I always say. Stay with us. I'm Liam Halligan. You're on the money.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money. We're discussing how should the West respond to the Kremlin cutting off physical gas supplies to both Poland and Bulgaria, EU members hugely dependent on Russian gas. Joining me now is former Chief of the General Staff and former Head of the British Army, General Lord Richard Dannatt. General Lord Dannatt, thank you for joining me here on GB News. It's a serious discussion. What did you feel when you heard of the Kremlin's latest move?
Well, it's an unsurprising move, given the focus that everyone is placing on energy. And much has been made in the West that because a number of Western countries are continuing to use high volumes of Russian energy, gas and oil, that we are effectively, in the revenues that they generate and the money that we spend, we are effectively fueling their war. So I think it's unsurprising that these economic issues have now risen pretty high towards the top of the pile.
Ben Harris, let's go back to you before we bring in our other guests. As I said in your introduction before the break, you're steeped in this story. You've been a foreign correspondent in Russia and across the former Soviet Union, Central and Eastern Europe for many years. You live now in Berlin, from where you run your news service, BNE IntelliNews. What is the mood here in Germany? Surely what the Russians are trying to do are pressure the Germans. The Bulgarians get 75% of their gas from Russia. The Poles get 45% of their gas from Russia. Germany is also a hugely dependent country on Russian energy. The difference is Germany is one of the world's top 5 economies and the EU's economic powerhouse. What are the Germans going to do to respond to this?
Exactly. I mean, the Germans are in an extremely difficult position. The Poles have been cut off, and they get some 10 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia every year. However, they've just built a new pipeline to Norway, which comes online in October, which is when the heating season starts, which delivers 10 BCM of gas. So the Poles are fine. They'll be fine this winter. But Germany is not the case. They get about 45% of their gas from Russia through pipelines, and they cannot easily replace that. It would cause a massive energy deficit. It would cause an energy crisis. The industry here is up in arms. They're saying, whatever you do, don't cut off Russian gas because it'll do huge damage to the economy. And they're trying to find a way around it. But because this gas is through pipelines, which you can't move, it's very difficult to replace. And you mentioned LNG, which is an alternative source, but there's simply not enough LNG production. There's simply not enough LNG tankers, and Germany has no LNG terminals yet. So it can't use that as an alternative. And so the threat of cutting off Germany is a very serious one indeed. It would cause economic chaos here. And the Germans are trying to avoid it at all costs. So like I say, this whole gas war that's starting, this is the first round. The Poles will be able to walk away because they're the first to have fully diversified themselves away from Russian gas. And the rest of Europe now is scrambling to do that. Bulgaria says it's going to rely on Germany, but that's the other reason that Germany is so important here, because half the gas, and it receives by far the most, half the gas it receives is then put into the system and feeds the rest of Europe. So countries like Italy are also entirely dependent on Russian gas coming through Germany. So Germany remains the most vulnerable and will be the focus of this gas war as it escalates, as the summer wears on. Because you also have to remember that during the summer, all the European gas tanks need to be refilled for the winter. And if that doesn't happen, we're going to have another gas crisis that will be 10 times worse than the one we've experienced in the last year, 2 years.
Gwydion Prince, you've previously advised the Ministry of Defence, NATO, the UN. How would you advise Germany now? The Germans have just sent a lot of tanks to Ukraine to help Ukraine fight Russia. Is it a coincidence that Russia has decided to make this move this morning after that news of those German arms shipments?
Well, I don't know that it's a direct link, but it's absolutely the case that Germany is having a political nervous breakdown. On the first weekend of the war, Chancellor Scholz, who was a protege of Chancellor Schröder, stood on his head and said that the 3 chancellorships of the pro-Russian Ostpolitik that was originally conceived by Willy Brandt was going to be set aside. But the words were not followed by actions for all the reasons that have just been explained. What we are now seeing, I think, is a complete realignment in German politics, because it's noteworthy that in the present government, by far and away the most realistic, by which I mean militarily realistic, minister is the foreign minister, Annelies Baerbock, who is a Green. And her closest ally, Norbert Röttgen, is the person who many on the Conservative side feel ought to have been a Conservative. So what used to be called traffic light politics in Germany, I think is going to be replaced by a continuum which is going to mark the whole of the free world, which is between a policy of containment towards a policy of transformation. But can I just, before I end this point...
Gwydion, would you mind? Sorry, I do apologise. We are squeezed for time, and I do want to bring in General Lord Richard Dannett for the final word. My apologies to both gentlemen. Lord Dannett, how would you advise the Germans?
To recognise, and as Gwyn Prince has been saying, the Germans have got an enormous problem. We all know that about 45% of their energy comes from Germany. They've got to look at every which way they can to diversify as quickly as they can. But I'm afraid one thing we've all said and we all recognise is that the Ukrainians are fighting this war on our behalf, but we've also got to share a lot of the pain. And a lot of the pain is going to be in less energy, less production, less GDP available. It's going to hurt. And why is it going to hurt? Because we're all doing the right thing. It's going to hurt us in different ways. And the Germans, I'm afraid, fine words from the new Chancellor, but they've got to bite the bullet and take the pain.
Former Chief of the General Staff and former Head of the British Army, General Lord Richard Dannett, appearing here on GB News. Gwydion Prinz, also former advisor to the Ministry of Defence, NATO and the UN. Ben Harris, Editor-in-Chief of BNE Intellinews. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben. Great to have you on the show as ever. And Justin Urquhart-Stewart, I'm trying to get rid of him, but he's sticking around for another discussion later in the show. Thanks to all my guests today. Now, more than half the country say they've been forced to change their lifestyle just to cover the cost of essentials like food, medicine and household utility bills as prices rise. According to newly released data from the consumer magazine Which, 6 out of 10 of us have recently cut back on shopping, taken out loans or sold possessions just to get by. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis joins us now live from Eastwood outside a supermarket. Will.
Good afternoon. Yeah, some of the things you mentioned, people taking out loans, going into their overdrafts just so that they can afford essentials. One of the things that really struck me was 1 in 10 of the people surveyed were having to borrow money from their family. Of course, the natural one that people go for is changing the way that they might shop. Of course, there are many different supermarkets, that are trying to vie for that position at the moment to be the cheaper one. We've seen a reduction in the amount of offered items, so discounted items, just because supermarkets across the board are trying to have that permanently lower cost price. But of course, there are places that aren't a supermarket where you can get a lot of your food. And in Eastwood this morning, I've been speaking to a local butcher about the change in his custom and the change in the types of items that people are requesting when they do go into his shop.
Yeah, you can see in their spending habits the things that they're buying, that they're sticking to the more essential and cheaper cuts of meat, which is smart buying, and also buying things in bulk and hampers, which will save them a few pennies in the long run.
And what about the cuts of meat that they're buying? Have they changed the way that they're shopping?
Yeah, certainly. There's certainly a market for the more old-fashioned or slightly exotic old-fashioned cuts of meat, things like oxtail and short ribs. So yeah, you can see that there's still very much a market for things like that.
And then what about your purchasing power? What's it like at the moment on the market and the farms where you might buy your meats?
Yeah, we're having to buy smart as well to try and keep the cost down so we can stay competitive. So yeah, we're having to buy equally as savvy as the customer.
And is there still a place for butchers at the moment, or is there more of a place while we've got the cost of living crisis?
I think if customers were to step into a butchers or a bakers or stuff like that and take that leap to ask the question to their butcher and ask advice and maybe tell them what kind of budget they're on, then yeah, a butcher will certainly point them in the right direction and help them as best they can.
Yes, of course, and if you're really struggling to pay for your essentials, it's only a very short trip to make it to the next stop where you might find yourself having to use a food bank. We've been seeing some figures today from the Trussell Trust that more than 2 million food bank parcels were given out in the last year. So there was a slight decrease from the amount of food banks parcels that people needed during the year of the pandemic, but still some really worrying levels. And I know a lot of people are going to be really keenly watching the money that's in their purses and in their pockets over the next few months.
Thank you, Will. That was Will Hollis, our East Midlands reporter on the cost of living crisis, keeping an eye on prices, helping you beat the squeeze, as are all our regional correspondents, because if it matters to you, it matters to us. That's what GB News is about. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up, today's Money Talks interview is with Hound. That's a vegan and cruelty-free dog brand which believes that vegan diets might be healthier options for our furry friends. First, it's the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused Boris Johnson of having his head in the sand over the cost of living crisis. In the final Prime Minister's questions before the local government elections, Sir Keir said he's failing to manage the economy. Boris Johnson defended his record, saying the government has cut taxes for working people. The High Court has ruled that government policies on discharging patients from hospital to care homes at the start of the pandemic were unlawful. The case was brought forward by two women whose fathers died from coronavirus in 2020. Judges said the regulations failed to take into account the risk to elderly and vulnerable residents from non-symptomatic transition. The Prime Minister says the 287 MPs who've been sanctioned by Russia should regard it as a badge of honour. The retaliatory move from Russia comes ahead of a major speech by the Foreign Secretary, who will urge allies to send tanks and warplanes to Ukraine. Liz Truss will say the West needs to cut off oil and gas imports once and for all. Well, Greenpeace figures show the UK has imported around £220 million worth of Russian oil since President Putin started the war. Moscow is now being accused of blackmail after Gazprom halted gas supplies to Poland and threatened to do the same to Bulgaria. Both countries have refused to pay in rubles. You're now up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Stay with us. Liam will be back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Now, you're most likely lying if you say you don't love gold. From Ian Fleming's Goldfinger to King Midas and his Golden Touch, we've been obsessed with the precious metal for generations. But it's not just the way it sparkles, because gold has traditionally acted as a way of storing wealth during times of high inflation, when the value of cash diminishes, and when geopolitical tensions are high. Times like now. Gold is a safe haven because it often tends to rise in price when the value of other financial assets falls. But how can we get our hands on the stuff? Well, joining me to answer this is none other than the CEO and founder of Glint, which is among the very first phone apps allowing the purchase, selling, saving and spending of gold. Jason Cousins joins me now, and Justin Urquhart-Stewart is still with us. Buying physical gold on your phone. Wow.
That's right. Well, we all need to fight inflation, don't we?
Gold's been on a tear over the last year or so. It's up above $1,500 an ounce now.
Yeah.
And that's 20% up over the last year. But it's not always that way, is it?
No, I mean, as confidence in fiat currencies go up and down, the price of gold does fluctuate, but it's generally going up. Or should say the confidence in fiat currencies are generally going down. I mean, in my lifetime, the pound, for instance, has lost more than 80% of its purchasing power. I mean, think about that. And that's before all this crazy inflation kicked in. But at the same time, gold's gone up over 500% in its purchasing power.
So when you say fiat currencies, basically you mean paper currencies like the pound,
yes,
the dollar,
right.
the euro, the traditional currencies that we're paid in. What kind of uptake are you seeing in the demand for gold now, the tendency to store money in gold, given that inflation has been rising and most of us think there's a lot more to come? And who are your customers?
So we've seen an absolute huge increase in the number of customers. I mean, over the last month, for instance, we've seen 10,000 new customers join Glint. Yeah. And over the last year, our existing customers have been buying, I think, on average, more than an extra 30% of gold in their platform. But our customers, you know, they're from 18 years old. I think our oldest customer is 93. They are people who, you know, struggle to make ends meet, and they're also wealthy people who've worked hard all their lives and want to be able to save it. But I had an interesting story the other day. I got in a taxi to go to a FinTech awards dinner. And the taxi driver said, he said FinTech, yeah, and he named a few different I named a few FinTechs. And
Financial technology.
And without saying anything to him about Glint, he turned around to me, he said, I've got one for you. He said Glint. So savvy taxi drivers as well.
I mean, OK, your name's getting out there. I could counter that. It's a journalistic kind of truism that when your taxi driver's telling you to buy something, it's a bubble. It means sell.
Look, I think the bubble is definitely the fiat currency. I mean, if I was to tell you that in the last year, depending how you measure the creation of money, in the US, for instance, they've printed between 20 and 40% of all US dollars in existence.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't.
They haven't physically printed the. They've expanded the central bank's balance sheet using computer keystrokes, and
that's right.
But I totally accept your point. It's called quantitative easing.
That's right. That's a phrase to complicate it all, and
it's called modern monetary theory.
Yes.
Haven't you heard about it?
Right.
Which, funnily enough, has the same initials as Magic Money Tree.
And of course, central banks can't print gold, and you know the government's not going to do anything about this. The only way we can fight inflation is we take control ourselves. We need to put ourselves on our own personal gold standard. And, of course, we all know that gold is security, and Glint is its key, because apart from just buying gold with Glint, you can also spend it. So when I finished that taxi journey, I paid him with gold using my Glint MasterCard. I felt fantastic. And the taxi driver, of course...
Sort of thing James Bond would do, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You might get the part.
Channel your own...
A bearded James Bond. That's what Justin's holding out for. Justin, we're not here to give financial advice, of course. None of us are regulated to give financial advice on television, nor is GB News. We should make that absolutely clear. We're discussing a market trend, a process and a product. But what do you think of gold as an investment in the long term? $1,500 for gold.
Well, I mean, you look at it. Look at the main asset classes that we've got and see how they behave over time. If you left out gold, you'd be actually finding yourself really quite short in dangerous times. So you need to have a proportion there. The problem with gold is, for long-term investing necessarily, is compounding with dividends, because you get the price goes up and down. Longer term, the value will be there, but you need other things as well. I don't mean gold mining companies either.
Because you don't get interest on your gold holdings. You don't get dividends on your gold holdings the way you do with cash or with equities.
And that compounds up. That doesn't mean you don't have gold, but you just have it as part of those asset classes, because you don't know what's going to happen next.
But I would
the gold bug's coming back. Here he comes. He's coming for you.
I'd say, look, gold isn't, to me, an investment. It's just money. If you put your cash under the bed, it doesn't earn any interest. The only reason
it loses value.
The only reason money, for instance, earns any interest in the good old days when you did get interest was that you put your money at risk. Whenever you put your money, your hard-earned savings, at risk, then you have the potential to make money or lose money. Gold is simply money. And we've made it everyday money for everybody out there.
Tell us a little bit about the app itself.
Yes.
You can just download it on the App Store. Am I buying physical gold, or am I buying what we call a derivative of gold, a claim?
No derivatives. We set out right from the very beginning to make sure that you are getting allocated gold that you legally own. It's got nothing to do with Glint. It is yours. And that's
But it doesn't physically move, does it? It's in a safe somewhere, and you have an ownership claim on it.
You own some of that gold. You own that gold. It's stored in a vault in Switzerland, run by Brinks. It's insured by Lloyd's of London. Glint is
As in the
regulated.
Brinks Bullion, Robbie.
Well, yeah.
There's a grand old name, isn't there?
Yeah, it's yours, and yeah, it's very secure. We can't, and unlike, for instance, cryptocurrency exchanges, we haven't yet found a way to dematerialize gold into electrons and hack it out of the vault. So
Are you convinced?
Well, I mean, yes, you've got to. Are you regulated?
Yes, we're regulated by the Financial Conduct
that's a
Authority.
key element of this, because you do find
It's quite a punchy question to ask on live television.
Well, because you look at some of the adverts going on, people are seeing adverts now for all sorts of things, such as, send in your gold and I'll send you the money. You think, whoa, hang on a second. So people need to go to the respectable, responsible people. That's good to hear.
We do our due diligence. Do you think it'd be on the money unless he was a pucker chap, regulated, all the bells and whistles, everything?
We just need to make sure that everyone knows that.
Everything in place.
I mean, I've got to make it very clear, the FCA do not regulate gold itself, but they regulate our business.
Yes,
and we're
and you are a broker of gold. They don't regulate a commodity.
It's a multi-currency payments app, so you can buy gold, as you said, save it, be able to send it to each other, as I did with the cabbie, and be able to spend it too with the MasterCard. So, again, money, hard money especially, should be something you'd be able to save and spend.
You know what? I get the feeling that we're going to be talking a lot more about gold here on The Money and on GB News generally as inflation cranks up. Jason Cousin's been fabulous to have you here on the show.
Thank you very much.
And all the best to you as well, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, co-founder of Regionally, as ever. Can't get rid of him. Earlier, we heard about defence spending. But what else is the UK doing to help Ukraine through this war? Well, we're told the UK's main supplier of NHS ambulances has suspended normal production to carry out vital work converting armed vehicles into ambulances for use in Ukraine. The Venari Group in East Yorkshire has already converted 50 former British military vehicles, with more on the way. Here's our security editor, Mark White.
Inside this vast facility, they're working flat out. A Yorkshire ambulance manufacturer now playing its part in the Ukrainian war effort. But these are no ordinary ambulances. They are specially converted former British military armoured vehicles, providing Ukrainian medics with far better protection in the conflict zone. The company, Venari, normally supplies the vast majority of UK ambulances. But all that's on hold, as everyone here is desperate to help Ukraine.
Something that we've seen on this project, like no other, is that the guys are coming from the homes where they've been watching the news with the war unfolding. And for them and for myself and for all of us, it doesn't seem to be business at the minute. This is personal. Personal edge to them. The work without clocking in, the finishing. We're all putting in over and above. It's nothing by comparison to what the Ukrainians are doing.
Than a month after they started this process, the company has already converted around 50 armoured vehicles into ambulances. The first 15 have now been delivered, driven to the region by Venari staff and handed over to Ukrainian medics. The Ukrainian authorities tell us they've been losing around 15 ambulances a day in the conflict. So these specially designed armoured ambulances, better able to resist gunfire and explosions, have never been more urgently needed. At the very least, the Russians have been indiscriminate in their targeting. But many Ukrainians claim their medics have, in some instances, been deliberately targeted. Earlier this month, this former NHS ambulance was badly damaged by shell fire outside a hospital in southern Ukraine. The loss of ambulances has forced locals to use completely unsuitable vehicles to transport the injured.
An ambulance is a good piece of kit and it's designed to do its job, but take away that infrastructure, take away the safety and add in maybe sniper fire and maybe close-on explosions and the rugged terrain of a conflict zone, and you've now got the perfect vehicle to do that.
Conservative MP Andrew Percy, a community first responder with the ambulance service, helped shape the idea of giving these ex-military vehicles a new lease of life.
They were all in their battle, army green with the cam webbing on it, the camouflage webbing, and they had the spent shells. So these vehicles have seen action in Afghanistan, surplus to requirements, and now being reprofiled in this way. And they are sadly needed. The fact that you need to have armoured ambulances is in itself a bit sad, really. And it speaks to the aggression with which the Russians are attacking Ukraine.
Every day, more of these ambulances roll out of this plant en route to Ukraine. Private donations and government grants should ensure dozens more are converted and sent off in the weeks ahead. Mark White, GB News, Goole in East Yorkshire.
That was Mark White there, GB News security editor, on the conversion of those military vehicles into ambulances for use in Ukraine. It's time now for my daily interview series, Money Talks, and brace yourself because you're really in for a treat. Today I'm talking to Jo Ammett. She's co-founder of pet care brand Hound. And if you've got a pet, and if you're anything like me, then they mean the world to us, of course. A dog is most definitely a man and a woman's best friend. But how do we keep them in tip-top condition? Well, according to research by the University of Winchester, our furry friends are better off health-wise on a nutritionally balanced vegan diet. Yes, you heard that right, vegan. And that's certainly what the company Hound believes, having launched its complete vegan pet food range last month. Hound was founded in 2015 and prides itself as meat and cruelty-free. But is this really the best option for the dogs themselves? Well, in the studio is Professor Andrew Knight, veterinary expert and Professor of Animal Welfare and Ethics at the University of Winchester. Great to have you with us. Here's Maggie, the rescue terrier. Here she is. Hiya, Maggie, who is vegan, I'm told. She'll certainly be making her voice heard. There she is. Yeah, Maggie. Is she a moment in the sun? And of course, Jo Ammett is with us, who's the co-founder of Hound. Jo, great to have you in the studio with us. Maggie will just put a little head above the desk in a minute so we can all see her.
Yeah, she's promised to be very good.
She is being very good. Tell us about this brand, vegan dog food. I mean, I'm sure you've done your research and you got funding for the business and you're a serious person, but some people will think this is an April Fool.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is a serious business. As you said, we've been around since 2015, making cruelty-free, plant-based products for dogs. We took some investment into the business in 2019 after a successful launch of vegan treats for dogs. And we launched our first range of plant-powered superfood that is nutritionally complete, as you say. So that means basically it's giving the dogs everything that they need to survive. So it's got all the nutrients, vitamins, minerals that a dog needs, but it's just a different source. It's not a meat source.
Well, we'll turn to the vet on the panel in a moment, Andrew Knight, if we may. But I'm a dog person. I've got a Cocker Spaniel, my family. We have a Welsh Terrier as well. I'm not a vet, as I say, but I must say Maggie does look very healthy. She's got a very glossy coat. She's got a lovely damp nose and she's got bright eyes. She's just hiding there under the desk. Maybe she's a bit camera shy. Where did this idea come from? Does anyone else do this in the world? And have you had trouble convincing people? I mean, how are your sales?
It's a good question. So first of all, there are other brands doing it as well. So we're not the only ones in the category, which is a great thing. Competition for us is a good thing. We're all doing the vegan food slightly differently. Hound does wet and dry food. There's other brands that are just doing wet or just dry, but we're all nutritionally complete. That means that we follow FEDIAF guidelines, which is what all products, including meat, have to follow.
Yeah.
So your dog has got the right amounts of methionine, L-carnitine, glucosamine, all the minerals that a dog needs. Protein, we've got high, if not higher protein than some dog foods. We're at 28% protein, but it all comes from a balanced source of plants. And to do sales, definitely growing. When we first launched, our only customers were people who own dogs and they were vegans themselves because they totally get it. We're vegan, I'm vegan, my family's vegan, so it would make sense.
And you look pretty healthy, if I may say so.
Thank you. I'm not fading away, but so we're all vegan, so it makes complete sense. And we've never fed our other dog a vegan food because there wasn't one on the market that was balanced yet. We're now about 4 brands that have got an offering. She's on ours, and as you can see, we've had her for a year. She was a rescue. She arrived with patchy skin coat. She didn't have her wet, happy nose back then. She was bred from, and she is doing fantastic.
What do you make of this, Andrew? You are a trained vet, you teach, you've taught veterinary science in the past, you're now a university academic working in this area. Can we be sure that dogs are getting everything they need just from plants?
Yes, I mean, as Joe says, the companies working in this sector are formulating these diets to supply all the nutrients that the dogs need from plant, mineral and synthetic sources. A lot of those are also the same sources in meat-based diets, so the difference is that these ones don't include animal products, but they are formulated to supply all the nutrients that are needed. And we know from our research that if we do this, then the animals appear to have health outcomes which are as good or better, actually, than many of the animals maintained on conventional meat-based diets, which is really fascinating. The other interesting thing is that looking at their behaviour in a lot of detail at feeding times, when they're feeding vegan versus meat-based diets, and analysing all that in vast amounts of statistical detail and depth, we've discovered that there's no significant difference at the end of the day. The animals consuming the vegan diets seem to be enjoying their food as much as the animals consuming the meat-based diets on average. Of course, dogs will be different, but that's what the overall result seems to be. So unless we figure out how to actually talk to them directly, I think...
You're working on that, I'm sure.
We're working on it.
That would be a story.
No one's cracked that yet. I think this is the best we can do, so we can safely assume this isn't cruel to the dog.
So owners of dogs, they shouldn't be concerned about giving their dogs vegan-based food. The dog is getting everything that he or she needs.
It's important that the diet is formulated to be nutritionally complete.
Okay.
And there are some diets in all groups, meat-based, vegan, others, which have not been formulated to be complete. So people need to be checking the labelling to make sure that the diet is nutritionally complete for dogs, and choosing a reputable company that's taken good steps to ensure the good quality of its diets.
You're making money, right? This is serious. You're making money. It's a viable business and it's growing.
It is growing. We've now got a few thousand customers on the food and growing. We've got big plans over the next 5 years. You're welcome to come on board.
Well, I'm certainly going to take this home and feed it to my dogs. Let me declare to the Standards and Privileges Committee this can of dog food. It wasn't a bribe. Joe Emmett, all the very best.
Thank you so
and
much.
Maggie the dog, and indeed Andrew Knight, veterinary scientist here from the University of Winchester. That's all we've got time for. Thanks so much for joining me here on The Money, here on GB News. We'll be back at 1 p.m. tomorrow, tackling the cost of living crisis, helping you beat the squeeze, because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most places dry today. Sunny spells in many western areas, but a lot of cloud across the east, especially eastern England, where it's still pretty chilly as well. High pressure is bringing most of us a dry day, but the winds go around high pressure like this, and so feeding in moisture from the North Sea and bringing the cooler conditions here too. So eastern parts of England, some areas here staying fairly cloudy and rather chilly. The Midlands may well brighten up a little bit through the rest of the day. Elsewhere, we've got some cloud, but also some good spells of sunshine for West Wales, parts of southwest Scotland and southwest England, although the sunshine here a little hazier perhaps than yesterday. With some sunshine squeaking up to 14, 15, maybe 16 degrees. Still pretty cool for the time of year, and it certainly feels chilly where that cloud persists across parts of eastern England. That cloud will break up a little bit more through this evening, but it may well then start to thicken up as we go through the second half of the night. Cloud once more spilling in from the North Sea. Where we keep the clearest skies over southern Scotland, northwest England, down into North Wales, we will see frost in rural areas, towns and cities well down into single figures. So again, a pretty chilly start to Thursday. Again, by and large, a dry day to come tomorrow. Again, no parts of eastern England likely to be quite grey. Much of Yorkshire down into the Midlands, across to East Anglia, may well stay fairly glum all day. Some cloud elsewhere, particularly over parts of Scotland, but generally it'll be western areas and parts of the south that see some good spells of sunshine. Feeling a bit warmer as well on Thursday in the sunshine with relatively light winds. Not feeling too bad with temperatures again into the mid or even high teens in places. Again, we'll see temperatures dropping quite sharply on Thursday evening where we keep clear skies. We've still got this high pressure controlling our weather into the weekends. We'll start to see a bit of a change as weather fronts topple in from the north, perhaps bringing some showers here. Goodbye.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, And I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the show